Professor Lok?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yeah. I think we can start the session. So it's about to be 11:15. So
Okay.
With your kind permission, I'm recording the session, which I need to submit it to the office as well.
That's all right.
Yeah, okay.
You can hear me okay, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Let me just share my screen, okay? Is screen sharing disabled? That's what it says on the screen.
Oh, yeah. I need to make you as a host. Yeah.
Okay.
Now you can start sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first lecture of the GIAN course series. So in this lecture, I'll be introducing you to engineered nanomaterials in the environment. So this will be more like an introduction or a refresher for those of you who have already taken some course related to engineered nanomaterials. Again, my name is Lok Pokhrel. I'm assistant professor of toxicology in the Department of Public Health here at East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina. My contact email is on the slide. So if you have any questions after the class, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to answer them as well offline. So the general overview of what I'll be talking to you today. So first we'll define nanomaterials, nanotechnology. We'll try to differentiate between natural versus synthetic nanomaterials or man-made nanomaterials. Characteristics of different types of nanomaterials, applications of nanomaterials, release scenarios of nanomaterials, and we'll also touch base on exposure pathways and sources of exposure. So before we dive deeply into the nano world, I'd like to introduce to you my professional journey, and I'll try to be real quick, okay? So I'm originally from Nepal. I did my BSc, Bachelor's in Science from Tribhuvan University, major in Geology and minor in Chemistry. I was valedictorian during my undergraduate program and received a silver medal. I also did my master's in Nepal in Geology and about to place second place nationally. But this was informal placement. Usually in Nepal, they don't officially announce. So I learned from the grapevine that I was at the second place nationally during the final exam. And then I came to US in 2007, did my master's in science in biology from East Tennessee State University, and then went on to PhD in the same university, but in a different program in environmental health with a focus on toxicology and risk assessment. And this is where I met Dr. Dubey. Dr. Dubey had recently come from I believe it was New Zealand. And Dr. Dubey served as my mentor or advisor for my dissertation research. And then from PhD in 2013, after I finished PhD, I went to postdoc at USEP lab in Corvallis, Oregon, where I had a 1-year stint, and then I moved on to Temple University as a faculty. I stayed there for 4 years, and since 2018 fall, I'm at East Carolina University here in Greenville, North Carolina. Some honors and awards. Currently, I serve as a council member for National Environmental Health Science and Protection Accreditation Council, also called EHAC. This is the National Environmental Health Related Program Accreditation Council in the US, and it also accredits schools outside the US for environmental health programs. Recently, I was inducted into Educators Hall of Fame by the College of Education and Advisory Board at ECU. And in 2020, I received NSF Early Career Investigator Award for my over 10 years of contribution to the sustainable nanotechnology. And this award was sponsored by National Science Foundation and SNO, which is Sustainable Nanotechnology Organization. I must acknowledge the funding support from different agencies and organizations, without which our research would not have been possible. North Carolina Biotechnology Center Translational Research Grant. This is an 18-month grant, and this grant supports our mosquito project related with nanopesticide. We also received another grant from NCBC. It's called FAST grant, and this is a 1-year grant, but we extended for additional 5 or 6 months. And this grant is related to COVID project, and we're trying to use our nano silver particle, which is found to have some efficacy against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. We have received 3 National Science Foundation grant through I-Core program. This is a training program that trains the young entrepreneur who could be faculty or students or staff. And I'm eligible to receive the 4th one, which I'll probably receive end of this month or early next month. And that grant will support our project on looking at if nanopesticide can be used to control household pests. Household pest is globally a big market. So we have mosquito project going on. So mosquito market is also huge globally. And now we are interested into looking at if our nanopesticide can be used or useful to control the household pest. And for this project, we are targeting the roaches, because roaches is a nuisance and it's a huge problem in the US and globally. We also received a small seed grant from ECU, Natural Resources and Environmental Cluster. And this was related to our dioxin project. As you may know, dioxin is an emerging contaminant. It is very hard to break down by other means. Current drinking water treatment processes do not degrade or break down the dioxin, and therefore there is a need for removal of dioxin from surface water and drinking water. So with this grant, it was $14,000 grant. We were able to develop membrane for filtration. So we use synthetic membrane, which is a polymer, and we modified the surface of the membrane, commercial membrane, using our different types of silver nanoparticles with different size and different surface charge. And with some combination, we are yet to optimize the combination, but with some combination, we were able to reach up to 92% removal efficacy. So this project was also successful. We are in the process of submitting a paper to a journal. And then I would like to acknowledge the ECU, Department of Public Health Startup Fund, which supports several of my projects. So coming to ECU, so this is my 4th year. So in the last 3 years or so, we have been able to submit 3 patents. Out of these 3, 2 are provisional patent, and 1 is the international patent. And we are in the process of filing some national patents. International patents does not cover each individual countries. If you are to do business in individual countries, you have to have the patent for those countries, in particular for manufacturing, for import and export, and the like. And therefore, so we are in the process of looking into the funding to apply for patent. Patent obviously is an expensive undertaking. So we are looking into those prospects to see if any industry partners would be interested to license our patent, existing patent, and then go for some national patents. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge some of my current collaborators. Dr. Saukula is a professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology in the British School of Medicine. So we're in the same school. Dr. Akula is in 5th floor, and I'm in the 7th floor of the same building. So he has been a really good friend of mine. So we have started working on COVID project since the spring of 2021. Dr. Vikas Kumar, he's a consultant and expert in computational modeling. He's helping us with the molecular docking for our COVID project, looking into if our particles can be docked into the spike protein. We have some evidence from electron microscopy, and it shows that our particles actually binds to the spike protein, but with computational modeling, or specifically the docking experiment, docking modeling, we wanted to see if it binds to the RBD domain or S2 domain of the spike protein. Dr. Paul Cook is the head of the infectious disease division in the ECU Brody School of Medicine, and he provides logistical support to our COVID project, and he works very closely with Dr. Akula. Dr. Sinafalla and his PhD students. So I've been a part of this group in Sarakod University in Iran. So we work very closely in various terrestrial crop plants, crop projects, looking into obviously toxicity, and more recently we are focusing on improving the nutrient content in different crop plants. Josh from ChemCore, University of Oregon, he provides us electron microscopy support. They have high resolution HRTM, Titan TM, which is I think world-class Titan electron microscopy. Anvis Dasari, Dr. Dasari is a postdoc at ECU Department of Chemistry. He provides electron microscopy support as well for our basic microbial project, especially related with bacteria. We have been currently working on E. coli, Salmonella, as well as Pseudomonas for our student projects, and Anvis provides electron microscopy support for those imaging needs. So before we dive deeply into Nanoworld, I also would like to introduce you to East Carolina University. Some of you may have interest in studying in the US. So ECU is a great university. So we have really nice building, as you can see here on the web page. ECU is located at the center of Greenville. Greenville is a small town, about 90 to 100,000 people. A very peaceful place. Previously, I was in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and it is a huge city. A lot of crime as well. So there was really safety concern for the children, and that in part prompted me to find a better place for children and family, and therefore that was one of the reasons why we moved here to Greenville. So at ECU, we have 19-20 different colleges and schools. And I obviously is at Brody School of Medicine. So we at Brody School of Medicine, we have several PhD and MS program. We have 6 different departments: anatomy and cell biology, biochemistry and molecular biology, microbiology and immunology, pharmacology and toxicology, physiology, and public health. So I belong to public health. In public health, we have DRPS, which is Doctor of Science in Public Health, and MPS, Master in Public Health. In addition to these major degrees, we also have 2 certificate degrees, and I direct one of these certificate degrees, which is Public Health Foundation in Practice, PHFP, which is what I direct, and other faculty, another senior faculty directs ERSD, which is Ethnic and Rural Health Disparity certificate degree. So in terms of the graduate students who are admitted to our PhD program, they are provided with $25,000 of stipend as well as tuition waiver. The training commitment is 4.5 to 6 year, and in the package also includes the health insurance. So health insurance will also be covered by the program. So MS in Biomedical Sciences is a 2-year program. If you are in MD or you are in medical school already, then this could be minimized or shrunk to 1-year program. It is lecture and laboratory based. Many classes that you take during the master's program in Biomedical Sciences can transfer into the PhD program in Biomedical Sciences. and we have very high-class faculty mentors available to mentor our students. PhD is lecture and lab-based, obviously. All concentration require a comprehensive exam. To obtain a candidacy, you need to pass the comprehensive exam. And then finally, you have dissertation defense, and you write a dissertation and submit to the committee before you earn the degree. Each concentration has its own set of specific requirements based on discipline. So among these 6 different departments, each concentration may have some specific requirements, especially during the admission process and also during the program. So there could be some variability or variation between the programs. As I mentioned earlier, for PhD student gets 25,000 per year stipend. So this is the salary, and you also get both in-state tuition as well as out-state tuition waiver. In addition, your health insurance will be covered. Many other programs at ECU may not cover both in-state and out-of-state tuition and or health insurance. Sometimes there is money available for master's student as well during the first year of the program, and up to 12,000 may be provided to those master's students. So with that, now let's dive into the nano world. So nano, as many of you may know, it's really small. Small is different. So in 2006, Nature journal started a new journal called Nature Nanotechnology, solely dedicating to nanomaterials. And they came up with the editorial titled Small is Different. During that time, or by that time, there were only a handful of papers published on nanomaterials and also nanotoxicology, ecotoxicology of nanomaterial. Nano-ecotoxicology is what we say most recently. So nanoscience and nanotechnology offer fundamental challenges in research and the possibility of a new industrial revolution. So it has been touted that nanomaterial or nanotechnology is going to bring new industrial revolution. Maybe the revolution has already started, as Dr. Dubey mentioned earlier, and Dr. Rao mentioned, alluded in the inaugural program earlier. There are hundreds and thousands of nanomaterials which are already being used in various applications. And here in this first lecture, I'll walk you through some of those examples as well. So whether we know or we don't know, nanomaterials may already be a part of our daily lives, from toothpaste to fabric or clothes to socks or underwear, you name it, nanomaterials might be present. But this also presents opportunities for all sorts of scientists and engineers. So today, when I read the paper, we see what kind of people are writing the paper. Many of them are doing toxicology research using nanomaterials without having toxicology background. And so this is good and bad. Good in the sense that we get some new information, bad in the sense that without good expertise or skills, there are a lot of gaps or holes in the way we do research. So there are all kinds of challenges and obviously the opportunities as well, because when there is a problem, there is always an opportunity. So nanotechnology deals with manipulating, measuring, miniaturizing, meaning making them smaller, and modeling matter in the size range of less than 100 nanometer in one dimension. So in 2006, the US government started an initiative called National Nanotechnology Initiative, NNI. And this is the definition that they came up with: less than 100 nanometer in one dimension. And throughout the course, I think we'll be talking about the size related effects, or whether or not size is important. So at this small size scale or nano scale dimension, matter exhibits uniquely different physicochemical properties. And some of these physicochemical properties include optical property or plasmonic property, catalytic property, surface reactivity, which could be because of the surface charge or because of surface defects, magnetic property, electrical property, as well as mechanical property related to strength and other properties. So again, when the materials or matter is scaled down in size to less than 100 nanometer, we expect to see some of these unique properties. And these unique properties are generally not observed in the bulk counterparts, which could be micron-sized particles or the ionic particles if you are talking about the metal or metal oxide nanomaterials. So in 2003, that was prior to the establishment of NNI in the US, American Ceramic Society published in its bulletin the definition of nanotechnology. And it kind of overlaps with what we learned from the NNI definition. The creation, processing, characterization, and utilization of materials, devices, and systems with dimensions in the order of 0.1 to 100 nanometers. So they came up with this size range, 0.1 to 100 nanometers, exhibiting novel and significantly enhanced physical, chemical, and biological properties, functions, phenomena, and processes due to the nanoscale size. So they paid emphasis on the nanoscale size. So perhaps during that time, a handful of research that was published tended to show the size may play an important role on the toxicity or on other physical chemical aspects of the nanomaterials. So there was some stress given to the nanoscale size on this definition. In 2011, Dr. Andrew Maynard is considered a KOL, key opinion leader in the field of nanotechnology. I think he worked for the White House several years back, and now he runs innovation lab or Rick's Innovation Lab, I believe, at Arizona State University, ASU. I met him a couple of times in some nano-related conferences before. So he writes regularly on Nature journals, especially Nature Nanotechnology. And in 2011, he wrote an article titled "Don't Define Nanomaterials." So basing regulations on a term with no scientific justification will do more harm than good, argues Dr. Maynard. So now the question is, if you don't define nanomaterials,
I think Lok, you can mute the participant.
Oh, I can mute them.
Yeah. As a host, you can mute all of them. I think she has left. The participant has left, it seems.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. So, so again, if you don't define nanomaterials, then what are we talking about, right? What is the matter? Is the matter conventional matter, or is this a new matter? So again, if you don't define, that is a problem. If you define, that is still a problem, right? In 2016, Future Tense, this is the magazine, science magazine. There is no good definition, which makes it difficult to regulate. So again, when there is no good definition, there is problem with regulation. When you don't define the material, there is a problem with regulation. As you can see here on the picture, these are tiny gold nanoparticles. And you can see they are different size and shapes, right? So even within the same sample, there is so much variability. So when you have these kind of samples, generally we call them polydisperse. And very recently in 2019, there was an editorial published in Nature Nanotechnology journal saying nanomaterial definition matters. I would rather put a question mark at the end here. Nanomaterials definition matters. So does it really matter or does it not? The definition and classification of nanomaterial in regulations leave too much room for interpretation. So when you say size range 0.1 to 100 nanometer or less than 100 nanometer, or you say one dimension, there leaves so much gap in terms of how you define nanomaterials. Or what constitutes nanomaterials? Now, coming from 2003 to 2022, we have published hundreds of new papers looking at size effect, charge effect, the interaction between these different material characteristics. However, it is still unclear what makes nanomaterial toxic. And we'll be talking more about the toxicity aspect later in the course. But the material definition, whether to have a definition or not to have a definition, both creates a problem. Now let's talk briefly about naturally occurring nanomaterials. Professor Rao, I think, earlier alluded to several types of naturally occurring nanomaterials, like volcano, sea salt-based nanomaterial that can be naturally formed in the sea. So here what you're looking at is the global burden of naturally occurring nanomaterials and the proportion of these different sources. So all values are given in trillion gram per year. So the dust storm constitutes the major source of naturally occurring nanomaterial. Then we have volcanoes, and you can expect them to dissipate or transport or transfer in the environment through different routes, through the atmosphere, via air or wind, through the rain, through the river system, through soil erosion, into the continental shelves, and then to the open ocean. So again, there are different numbers here, and these numbers are not very real. They're not based on real experiments. So these are theoretical predictions, okay? So I will not weigh these numbers too much. However, we can see, or we can have a general understanding of how these nanomaterials are widespread and the proportion or apportionment of the relative weightage for each sources in terms of the generation of nanomaterials, especially the naturally occurring nanomaterials in the environment. So what this means is we are exposed to naturally occurring nanomaterials since millennia, right? Now comes incidental nanomaterials or incidental nanoparticles. And most of these incidental nanoparticles are created by our activities. And most of these are related with combustion or combustion-related activities, as you can see here on the pictures. Now, what is the difference between incidental, natural, as well as engineered nanoparticles or synthetic nanoparticles? I think there are some basic differences. Incidental nanoparticles, as well as naturally occurring nanoparticles, they are diverse in sizes and shape, as well as the composition. They may have several materials or elements mixed in them. So it could be a mixture. As you may know, mixture toxicity is very hard to quantify. Scientists struggle to ascertain which component within the mixture is more toxic than the other. Obviously, we have designed some terms like additive effect, right? When you combine A with B, 1 plus 1, if it gives 2, that is additive effect. If it gives more than 2, 2.1, 2.2, that could be called a synergistic effect. Though we have some criteria to define some of those toxicities, however, the mixture toxicity is very hard to quantify because materials may behave differently when they are combined together as compared to when they were alone. Now, when it comes to synthetic or engineered nanomaterials, these are more well-defined nanomaterials. Not always, but there are ways we can optimize our synthesis, and therefore we can have discrete size, discrete charge, or discrete coating containing nanomaterials. And these nanomaterials can be designed for specific purposes. So here in the picture, you're looking at core material, which could be some kind of metal, or in some cases, it could be non-metal as well, or it could be carbon too. And you can see a cell material, which could be some kind of polymer, and there could be some surface ligands or ligands. It could be organic, inorganic, and so on. Now, in addition to some of those basic differences, now when we talk about synthetic nanomaterials, there is so much we can do. There is so much we can expect from these particles. We can create a lot of different size groups within the 100 nanometer size range, or maybe beyond. If you follow OECD definition of nanomaterial, although I did not put the OECD definition of nanomaterial here, which is mostly applicable to in the European countries, they generally tend to look beyond the size. If it is 125 nanometer or 200 nanometer, but still if it shows some important characteristics which are different from the bulk counterparts or ionic counterparts, they tend to say those larger particles also nanomaterials or nanoparticles. So there is size, and the surface can be modified in many different ways. PEZ can be used, polyethylene glycol, as well as other coatings can be used. In our lab, we mostly use amino coating, amine coating, or citrate coating. COH is a citrate group, a citric acid group, which gives a negative surface charge to the particle. Amino NH2 provides positive surface charge to the particle. SH is a sulfhydryl group. And generally with SH group, perhaps the nanoparticles may tend to be less toxic because it is a thiolated group or thiol group. And generally thiol groups are less toxic. So with these different types of surface capping agents, a surface coating, a surface decoration, whatever name you give it, you will generate certain types of charges, whether positive charge, negative charge, high positive, high negative, low positive, low negative, in some cases neutral charge, such as if you use PVP, polyvinyl pyrrolidone, it tends to give very close to neutral charge. So different types of surface charges can be generated, and we can test the effect of charge on some bioassay. You can also add antibodies, peptides, aptamers, and depending on the need, what you are trying to target. Nanoparticles come in different shapes. They could be sphere, they could be cubes, they could be rod-shaped, plate-like, they could be star-shaped, they could be hollow as well. And on the left, you can see other types of more complex nanomaterials, like carbon nanotubes. The diameter could be few nanometer, but they could be several centimeter long. And dendrimers, so these are carbon atoms grouped together. A protein drug conjugate, a polymeric nanoparticle, liposomes. Liposome research is also taking really good traction these days. You can pack certain drugs within the liposome and deliver, and then bypass the immune system. Metal nanoparticles, obviously, they are very famous and widely used, widely studied as well. hydrogel particle. So it's a hydrogel. Hydrogel itself may be non-toxic, but the particles within the hydrogel may have some properties that could be used to kill the microbes if your goal is to kill the microbes. But when it comes to toxicity testing, how do you test the toxicity of hydrogel? It becomes complicated. Quantifying the dose becomes complicated. So there are all kinds of issues, and obviously we'll be talking about some of these issues throughout the course. And solid lipid hybrid particle. Again, this is another example of complex nanomaterial. So there is so much diversity within the nanoparticle based on size, surface charge, shape, material type used, surface decorations, and so on and so forth. So it is really a complex undertaking when you are trying to study the nanomaterials in the lab. This is just to show you how widely nanomaterials are used. And this is a little bit older data that we had collected earlier from 2013, the comparison between 2006, 2011, and 2013. So silver seems to be most widely used nanomaterial in various material applications in various consumer products. And then carbon, and then we have titanium, silicon, silica, zinc, and gold. I think gold generates really nice size and shape particles, but because they are expensive, perhaps their use is very limited. I believe there are a couple of cancer drug that uses gold nanoparticles. So we have seen, so if you compare 2006 to 2013, so there is a tremendous exponential increase in the nanomaterial use in different material application or consumer product application. So these are some of the pictures of some of the most common materials or the consumer products that we use that may have nanoparticles of some kind, or at least the companies or the vendors claim that they may have nanomaterials of some kind, or they use some type of nanotechnology. So there are all kinds of materials, from sealant for auto to air filters to inner lining in the beer bottle, refrigerator, anti-condensation visor, supplement for immune function, food container. I believe there was some food container, the plastic containers marketed in the US, perhaps sold by Target. But EPA asked the company to withdraw the product from the market. And since the product was, I think, withdrawn from the market, again, with the lack of understanding of whether or not nano silver, I believe nano silver was used in these food containers, lunch boxes. So the unknowns perhaps led to the EPA to request the industry partner to remove the product from the market until the new science becomes available. So still, we are not really sure whether or not nano silver may pose significant risks to human health. So this is just a snapshot from the New York Times, published a few years back. And it claims that over 3,000 nanomaterials are present in Nanoworld database. This is one of the most common and I think widely accessed nano-related database. It shows different products as well as nanomaterials. So now, I mean, we know there are thousands of materials that may contain nanomaterials or nanoparticles of some sort. Now the question is, do they pose risks to human health and the environment? And this is one of the questions that we're trying to address with our own research too in the lab. And again, nanoparticles or nanotechnology can be used in creating new fabrics, smart clothes. Nanomaterials can be used in semiconductor, small circuit that can be used in the clothes to make the clothes weatherproof, to make the clothes for the military as well. Nanomaterials have been used in fuel cells, energy applications. I believe some of these solar cells using quantum dots or cerium oxide nanoparticles have higher efficacy as compared to the traditional solar cells. Batteries is another area where nanotechnology has been explored. The problem with battery is the disposal. Disposal of battery is a big problem, whether you consider the conventional batteries or the new batteries as well using nanotechnology. We really don't know about nanomaterials, even in the pristine form. Now, when it is used, when the particles are acid in the battery, where a lot of electricity comes in contact with the particles, what will happen to the particles themselves? What will be the fate of the particles within the battery? So as they are released into the environments upon disposal, not all batteries, I believe, are recycled. Even during recycling, there is potential for exposure. So there are a lot of questions, that merit answers, and we don't have answers to all those questions. Cosmetics, zinc oxide nanoparticles, titanium oxide or titanium dioxide nanoparticles have been used in sunscreen. Likewise, in toothpaste, food and drink packaging materials. One of the areas we are also looking at currently in our lab is whether our nanosilver particles can be used in food packaging material to minimize foodborne illnesses. We have some indication that our particles are safer to human health. We have done oxidative stress assay. We have also looked at the cells under the microscope. We also currently completed eye irritation assay, eye irritation test called epiocular assay using third-party lab. And it came out to be non-irritant to the eye, which is class 4 classification based on EPA classification, which is a non-irritant. And it does not require labeling if we move forward with our nanopesticide as a pesticide for mosquito control application. It will not require labeling as an eye irritant. So in that regard, the same particle we are trying to use for food packaging material. So again, there is a fear on one hand because most of the earlier studies use high dose particles. So several 100 milligram to several thousand milligram or several 100 gram of nanoparticles were used in the earlier studies. So I think that created a big scary situation among the scientists and obviously with the regulators and the consumers to a certain degree. Household products may have nanomaterials, sports product like tennis racket, bicycle rim, tire. Likewise, in the aerospace industry too, I believe graphene, carbon nanotubes may have some applications. Now, just keeping these applications on the side, or the unknowns of the nanomaterial on the side, I would like to talk, I'll take a few minutes here to talk to you about if nanotechnology can create utopia. So first we need to define what utopia is, right? Utopia is an imagined community or society that possesses highly desirable or nearly perfect qualities for a citizen. So we want everybody to have sufficient resources, right? So that everybody is happy and live well. So that is really an utopian society. And perhaps in all democratic nations, including in the history, many societies intended to create an utopia, but it never happened. Now, here we have Professor Michio Kaku from CUNY, New York. He is a theoretical physicist, and many of you may know him. He is a very well-spoken physicist. He is everywhere on YouTube, and he is also a really good science communicator, which is, again, another problem with science. We really don't communicate science well, and we need really good scientists to come at the forefront to communicate science to the lay audience. So Dr. Kaku addresses the question of possibility of utopia, the perfect society that people have tried to create throughout the history of mankind. These dreams have not been realized because we have a scarcity. There is famine, there is lack of water. Everybody knows about what is going on in Ukraine currently, and there are several children who died with dehydration. So in the 21st century, people are dying with dehydration, right? So there is scarcity. And oftentimes we humans create those scarcity for some regions, vested interest. However, now we have nanotechnology, and with nanotechnology, perhaps maybe in 100 years, we will have something called the replicator that replicates and replicates and replicates, and we will have abundance, enormous abundance. So this is what Dr. Kaku, Professor Kaku, talks about in this YouTube video. I think this video is a brief video, but if you watch 1 minute 10 second to 1 minute 52 second, it mostly talks about nanotechnology and nanotechnology utopia. It's really fascinating to see how scientists who do not really study nanomaterials or nanotechnology have so high regard for the expectation of nanomaterials or nanotechnology in today's society. Now let's talk about nanomaterial release scenarios. What are the different scenarios that exist whereby we release nanomaterials? Now, to understand the release, we need to know whether or not how much nanomaterials are being produced. So this is one of the most recent paper that I could find on the amount of quantity of nanomaterial being generated. So in the paper, I think the paper is written by some European scientists. In the paper, they list a few companies. They did not provide the specific name of the company, but they just used the code company A, B, C, D, Institute A, and then they also compiled some data from the literature. So as you can see here, not too much nanomaterials are being created. So company A has over 1 million ton. 1 ton is 1,000 kilogram per annum. So this is for silica nanoparticle, and this middle column is for cerium oxide or ceria nanoparticle, and the final column is for silver nanoparticle. So you can see it's a fairly small quantity, right? Given the enormity of the Earth we have. Now, I think this begs the question, so we have a small quantity generated, do we need to be worried about it? Now, as the materials are created, are manufactured, are produced, they will be used in many different forms, right? And we saw those applications earlier in several slides. So as nanoparticles are embedded in different material applications or in different consumer products, so there is potential for exposure. Now, when it comes to release, how are nanomaterials released? They can be released from the production site if it is not properly handled. They can be released to the air, they can be released to the soil, they can be released to the neighboring water, surface water, and then to the subsurface water or groundwater, underground water. And ultimately, they can reach bigger water bodies, settle at the bottom of the water bodies in the sediment. So these are some of the release scenario, and related to the release scenario comes the exposure. And in a moment, we'll talk about exposure. So this is just a schematic from the same paper, I believe, where you can see the production volume at time t. So certain amount of nanomaterials are produced by different companies. And then these particles, depending on the type of the particles, they have several applications in different consumer products. And then we have certain nanoparticles in stock, and a portion of that, what is in stock, will be in use, and then a portion of what is used will be released to the environment. So we are starting with a small quantity to begin with, right? So if we have small quantity at the start, ultimately the amount that is released will be a small fraction of that initial quantity. So perhaps the question would be, is it really a scary situation we are currently in, given nanomaterials have found wide application in different consumer products? We don't know. I don't have the answer to that question. So as I mentioned earlier, there is time-dependent development of exposure. So exposure, with exposure comes toxicity. So you can be exposed through water, you can be exposed through air, atmosphere, you can be exposed through soil and sediment. So depending on the human activities or behavior, you can be exposed through these different media or sources. And then on the lower right, we have environmental concentration and risks. So PEC is predicted environmental concentration, and we have probability function on the y-axis here. And here we have risks, which intersects the PEC predicted environmental concentration and the species sensitivity, probability of species sensitivity distribution. So different species may have different sensitivity to nanomaterials or to other pollutants or contaminants in the environment too. And depending on the predicted environmental concentration or maybe the real environmental concentration, some nanomaterials may have some accumulative potential. There are, I think, a handful of papers looking at trophic transfer in some organisms, but we don't really have a good understanding of whether or not nanomaterials transfer to different trophic levels and whether or not they are bioaccumulative or whether they could biomagnify. Now I would like to take a few minutes to walk you through some science related to exposure. And this relates to both conventional chemicals as well as engineered nanomaterials, or maybe natural nanoparticles as well. Identify exposure pathway. So when you are quantifying risks, so when we talk about exposure, we are talking about the concept of risk assessment. Within the framework of risk assessment, exposure is one aspect of it. And the first step in risk assessment, probably Dr. Dubey will be talking more about risk assessment in his lectures. So one aspect of risk assessment is exposure assessment. The first step being hazard identification, the second step being dose response assessment, and the third step is exposure assessment. So you need to identify different exposure pathways. All potential exposure pathways should be included in risk assessment. So when you're conducting risk assessment as a risk assessor, whether you work for the EPA or whether you work for the CDC in the US, or whether you work as a consultant risk assessor, that is what you need to do. Identify all potential exposure pathways. Pathways may be eliminated from detailed analysis if there is sound justification. If you are to remove any pathway from detailed analysis of risk assessment, you must provide sound justification as to why you eliminate that pathway. And we'll talk more about under which conditions you can eliminate the pathway in the next slide or so. Complete exposure pathways, summarize information for all completed pathways. So whatever number of pathways you have identified, one pathway would be ingestion, exposure through the GI tract. Next would be dermal, through skin. The other pathway, and perhaps the major pathway for a lot of contaminants, would be inhalation. So these are three major pathways. So with regard to these pathways, identify potentially exposed population. So what populations are potentially exposed? Is it small children who went to the daycare and they were exposed in the daycare? Or is it elderly population? They were exposed in the nursing home? Or is it the adult population who were exposed during their work hours at the job site? So you need to identify potentially exposed populations. Exposure media. What was the media through which they were exposed? Was it water? Was it soil? Was it air? Was it sediment? Was it biota? So there are basically 5 major media. And biota also includes food. Exposure point. At what place or point were they exposed? Selection for quantitative analysis. and then based on your expertise, based on your team's expertise, based on your collaborator, now you need to identify what would be the best method, mathematical method, or statistical method that you wanted to use to quantify that exposure. And then justification if pathway excluded. If you have excluded any pathway, you have to provide justification. Maybe dermal, you can exclude because the contaminant in question is not lipophilic. It may not traverse through the skin. So in which case, the justification seems sound, and therefore you can exclude that pathway. Pathways for current land use and any alternate future land use should be summarized separately. So you need to understand the current land use scenario as well as any alternate future land use. What is predicted in the future for that particular land? Sometimes you may not have that information, but you can reach out to your county or your district or your city government to ask if they have any plan for the next 10 years or 15 years for that particular property. So you have to make sure that you have enough information about the land use pattern. Identify potential sources and receiving media. Sources of contamination, the media that receives the contamination for the past, at the moment, in the current, and also any future, and anything that might be released in the future. So, I mean, taken together, a risk assessment itself is a huge undertaking. Sometimes it takes 10, 15 years for the EPA to do a proper risk assessment at the hazardous waste site. So it takes a lot of time and effort and resources to conduct a risk assessment. And exposure assessment is a key for risk assessment. Map the suspected source area. Mapping means measuring. And the extent of contamination, again, some kind of measurement must be done. You have to take the samples, water sample, soil sample, air sample, and do some kind of analysis to quantify the concentration of the chemical in question. And how many chemicals are there? Is it just the chemical A or chemical B, chemical C? How many chemicals are actually involved in terms of exposure? So you need to look into all those scenarios. Now, in terms of justification for eliminating pathways, the exposure resulting from pathway is much less than that from another pathway involving the same medium at the same exposure point. Exposure resulting from the pathway is much less. So if the exposure is deemed to be very insignificant, then perhaps you can eliminate that pathway and not include in your final risk assessment. The potential magnitude of exposure from pathway is low. The probability of exposure occurring is very low, and the risks associated with the occurrence are not high. So probability of exposure occurring is very low, very low. So again, the scenario is related with low exposure, low probability of occurring, things like that. So if you really feel confident that that particular pathway is not really important, then providing some of this justification will be helpful. And it is important, especially when you are conducting risk assessment for some of these agencies. Now here, I just wanted to throw you a slide on fate of ANMs. Perhaps later we'll talk more about the fate of ANMs. And Dr. Barin Dharan may also be talking about stability and fate in his lecture. So again, what you can see here is there are a lot of things that can happen to nanomaterials as they are released to the environment. There can be absorption with naturally occurring materials, or naturally occurring microparticles, nanoparticles, all kinds of ions and ligands could absorb onto the nanoparticles. There can be deposition of nanoparticles from the air to the water as well as to the soil. They can enter the living organisms, so there could be some amount of bioaccumulation. We are not sure whether or not the biomagnification occurs, but in this slide you can see there is some biomagnification being shown. Nanoparticle may dissolve completely and can also reconstitute. There are a few papers showing reconstitution of nanomaterials in the environment in the presence of some kind of organic matter. So again, the question is, do we test the pristine particles? Do we test the acid particles? Do we test environmentally acid particles? What do we test? How do we test? So there is so much uncertainty in testing the toxicity of nanomaterials. And obviously any research requires a lot of funding and great students as well to do research. So we have a lot of challenges in understanding perhaps every aspect of this fate of nanomaterials. So just to summarize, we have a lot of challenges, but with challenges, we also have opportunities to do some good research, do some good science. Perhaps moving forward, we may want to use nanotechnology to help clean up past environmental damage related with a lot of conventional chemical exposure, the environmental burden created with high volume pesticides that we release into the environment day in and day out. We can correct present environmental problems, and drinking water contamination with emerging contaminants perhaps can be removed. Prevent future environmental impacts. We are not really sure about that. Sometimes we think that the particles are really great and we try to use for various applications. But 10, 20 years down the road, we will learn more about the particles, and perhaps the story might be different. We really don't know. Again, I think our goal as an environmental health scientist, nanoscientist, toxicologist, risk assessor would be to think in a way to use less chemicals, make it low cost, low dose, effective for targeted applications, and more so perhaps designing nanoparticles for application purposes, perhaps for good purposes, killing the bacteria that causes sepsis, or killing the bacteria that causes nosocomial infection in the hospital setting, treating the coronavirus, right? These kinds of things. So having targeted applications will minimize environmental release as well. So again, so with that, I thank you everybody for listening, and I'd be happy to take questions that you may have.
Yeah, any questions from the participant side? Okay, no issues. You can note it down, and then if you have any other questions, you can also be in touch with Professor Lok in the upcoming sessions. So
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Professor Lok, for the inaugurating the day, and then with your session, and then I will be taking the participants forward with respect to their nanoparticles presence in the aquatic environment.
Awesome. So, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah. Have a great day. Okay.
Yeah. Professor Lok, you can make me as a host, and then so that I can have the control over presenting.
So how do I do that?
Okay, let me check whether I can reclaim the host. Okay,
yeah,
I have done it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you everyone tomorrow. Bye.
Yeah, bye. Yeah, good afternoon, participants. I welcome you all for the second session for the day. That is nanoparticles in aquatic environment. So good afternoon all. So I welcome you all for the second session for the day, where I would be taking you all with respect to the nanoparticles system. I don't have control over it. Is the slide visible? Is the slide changing? Anyone? I hope the slide is visible, I feel. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Yes, pardon?
Yes, the slides are visible.
Okay, fine. Thank you. So with respect to the introduction from the inaugural as well as from the last session, this Professor Loeb session. So here we would be discussing about the nanoparticles presence in aquatic environment. So one such thing is the presence of these nanoparticles in aqueous environment. So already Professor Loeb has taken us through different materials or the consumer products which are available in the environment, and then how they make it up in different domains of our life. So moving on. So how big is the nanoparticles? There is nothing much for me to add. Already Professor Lok has had it up. And then I will just go a quick overview about the other things, that is the types of nanoparticles, mainly natural, engineered, and incidental. So with respect to the naturally occurring nanoparticles, the nanoparticles which are there in the environment, that is one such thing. And then even you have listened in the inaugural session, Professor Rao has also mentioned about the naturally occurring nanoparticle, that is nothing but the carbon-based nanoparticle, that we call it also as soot. Not only with respect to the burning in the villages, but also at the time when you drive a car for a long distance, or when the car or the moped or the four-wheeler or eight-wheeler gets old, when you touch the exhaust pipe, you will be having very minute particles that we normally term as soot. So again, naturally is nothing but the naturally occurring nanoparticles. Already Professor Lok has also told what is the major share of these naturally occurring nanoparticles in the environment, the pathways, the route in which it gets carried out from one point to other, and then how they disperse, dissipate in the environment. So naturally occurring nanoparticle mainly from the oceans, again in the form of aerosols, which can travel for a larger distance, volcanic ash, where the ash can be even transported from even for 100 miles down the vicinity of the volcano. And then lightning, that is also very less percentage of nanoparticle that gets formed, but still we can't able to neglect that. And then humic substances and biomolecules, humic substances with respect to the decay of these small microbes, as well as the organic matter in the environment. When they degrade, then at last they get into a very small size. And the nanoparticle microbes, so these microorganisms also produce a very tiny nanoparticles, but these concentration or their presence in the environment is not that huge when compared to the man-made nanoparticles, that we call it as engineered nanoparticles. So in one way we can term them as man-made nanoparticles. Why? Because they have been made for a specific purpose in order to solve a problem. That is one such thing. Or otherwise anthropogenic, or we can also say that anthropogenic, that is also man-made, or engineered nanoparticles. We engineer the nanoparticle based upon our need. So whether we need a size specific nanoparticle or shape specific, or what should be their reactivity, how efficient they need to be with respect to your physical, chemical, optical properties, because these nanoparticles have been extensively used. As Professor Lok said, that the tennis bat that we normally use are now coated with nanoparticles. The materials that are that we wear, or the washing machines that we have, now uses nanoparticle for cleaning the cloths. And these nanoparticles have been used not only in day-to-day life, but also in several industries such as semiconductor industries, so that their presence is now inevitable with respect to our life. And then moving on, incidental is again, uh, uh, it is not made deliberately, but still the incidents, incidentally, they are available in the environment. So it can be from mining activity. So that is one such thing. It can be from the automobile exhaust, which I've already given as an example. Combustion, again, burning of materials such as it can be from organic material. Paints and pigments. Normally, this titanium dioxide is being used in some of the paints, and then these can accidentally get released into the atmosphere. So once they get accidentally released, their concentration, their nature in which it has been used, all becomes a question mark with respect to their presence in the environment. So what happens really is a matter of question. So moving on, with respect to engineered nanomaterials, as I have said that they have their presence not only in one single domain, but in all the sectors that we manufacture goods. So moving on, natural nanoparticles, I will move on because already it has been done extensive with respect to Professor Loeb. And then this was the same image where he has used it and then communicated that what is the major share of these naturally occurring nanoparticles in environment. So mostly from the dust storm, because if you keenly look about the meteorological aspects, each and every country is dependent upon the onset of monsoon, again the pressure variations, and then air is one such medium in which the pollutants keeps traveling across the geographical boundaries. So dust storm is one such thing. Even dust storms are more prevalent in our north western part of India, especially Rajasthan, Punjab, Delhi, parts of Madhya Pradesh, and parts of Uttar Pradesh, where at the peak summer you will be having dust storms, and then it will be carrying huge amount of dust and then depositing at one place, taking it up. It starts either in Rajasthan, but it settles in Delhi or in Uttar Pradesh. So there is a huge chunk of these materials that gets transported within the medium that is nothing but the air. And then volcanic ash, again, as said by Professor Lok, and then volcanic ash is also one such medium where these naturally occurring nanoparticles enters the atmosphere. Once these two tallies, either it gets settled or dispersed or deposited in one or the or otherwise, there are several sinks. There are several sources in the atmosphere, as well as there are several sinks in the atmosphere where these nanoparticles get into the sink. So one such thing is again with respect to the ocean, onto the land, or otherwise in the wind as a medium itself. And then natural chemical weathering processes is also one such medium, or otherwise one such process in which the environment gets nanoparticles on its own, and then followed by the other things that we have already discussed. So moving on, engineered nanoparticles, as it is, the name itself is nanoparticles are tweaked or otherwise synthesized or fabricated based upon the needs of the man or the human. So that is one such thing that has been made or otherwise tweaked in such a way that the size can be tweaked, or otherwise the material can be made as a composite material, two different materials getting binded together that can made as a composite material. So yielding a better efficiency with respect to the properties. So the materials has been tweaked to synthesize these engineered nanomaterials, and then it can be used in different domains such as food. One such thing is silver is being used for antibacterial properties, energy for solar cells, and then for water treatment using nanoparticles have become one such area where it has been used extensively to kill the pathogens, especially the microbial content which is there in the water. So again, the most common engineered nanoparticles which are used are mainly metal as well as metal oxide based. So forming titanium dioxide, iron, and aluminum oxide. In the previous presentation also, with respect to Professor Sloke's highlight of the commonly used nanoparticles in environment, silver topped among the all because of its antibacterial property, followed by other nanomaterials. These nanoparticles have their controlled size, shape, as well as their composition. The composition differs, as I have already highlighted, that a composite nanoparticle can also be made in order to have a specific size, shape, and reactivity. Uh, so as it has found its presence in various domains, be it the medical industry or manufactured in different quantities of, or otherwise in large quantities for especially different domains such as pharmaceutical, electronics, computers, as well as buildings such as binders. So moving on, incidental nanoparticles, a byproduct of a human activity. These are all not generally tweaked or engineered nanoparticles. These will not be of specific size, but it will be of different size. And then it is a byproduct of human activity, generally having very poor size ranges and shapes. So this will not have any size or otherwise a specific size or otherwise a specific shape. Many of these processes that generate incidental nanoparticles are common every day. So such as running an engine or a diesel engine or a petrol engine, large scale mining, and even starting a fire. When you start a fire or otherwise when you start a pump or motor or any other thing. So these will yield incidental nanoparticle, but still, though their share of these nanoparticles in the environment is pretty low when compared to engineered nanoparticles. These are also existed, but still the track of these incidental nanoparticles in the environment is still not being taken into consideration, and their fate or otherwise the behavior or otherwise their aftermath or otherwise their fate, especially in different domains of environment, is still not explored to a greater extent. So as highlighted, so the commonly available nanoparticles, again, the application of nanoparticles in different domains, be it the superconductors, be it the carbon sequestration, or otherwise, be it the nanoparticles have been used now for delivering drugs, or otherwise to cure a specific part of the human body. So it all depends upon what is the purpose in which this nanoparticles or nanomaterials are used of. Either it can be in the antibacterial field, or otherwise it can be there as a hydrogen storage, or it can be done as a specific coating onto the metal sheet so that their life can gets extended. So again, with respect to the metal nanoparticles, silver dominates. We all know why, followed by titanium, followed by zinc, gold, and other. And then with respect to carbonaceous, for carbon, followed by CNT, carbon nanotubes, fullerenes, and right now the pace is picking up for graphene. Graphene as one such material which has been widely used in different fields, such as for capture, solar cells, and then whatnot. Graphene is now picking it up, be it the graphene sheet or otherwise the graphene particles as such. So nanoparticles in the environment, these nanoparticles are there in the environment before the man-made nanoparticles arrived, but still their concentration was very low, and then their fate was not at all determined. But once these nanoparticles gets onto the environment, so the pollution aspect comes in. One or the other way, it has been dumped because of its use, or otherwise because of its continuous use in the environment, they finally are available in the environment, and then they are get exposed to the humans in one or the other form. Once you get exposed because of these man-made nanoparticles, what is their the first question comes at what frequency does these are being exposed? So that is one such thing. And then what is the quantity that we have a safe limit, so that by having an exposure also, still we don't have any harmfulness to the humans. And then what is their concentration? When it comes to concentration, it can be in different streams of environment. So either it can be air, it can be in soil, it can be in water, and then it can be in wastewater. What is whether are they really a matter of concern? As Professor Lok said, that nanomaterials defines matter. So again, are they really matters which is there when present in the environment? And then if they are a matter of concern, so what are their risks that are being possessed, and then how much they carry about the toxicness? What is their concentration that can be permissible, or whether they go overboard about the toxic concentration? Once their toxic concentration gets more and more, what is their effect onto the living organisms which is there surrounded by these nanoparticles. So there comes the nanotoxicology as well as human health and safety. So what is the safety of having these nanoparticles? Are they really safe in the environment, or once it's used, after it's used, what are they really up to? So one such classic example is the silver nanoparticles. The silver nanoparticles are now used in t-shirts, shirts, especially the socks material. So once after these nanoparticles have been incorporated or coated onto the socks, they have a specific purpose. They make the material cool, as well as they don't allow the pathogens to grow on in the cloth material. So once after their use is over, so you start washing the cloth, and then once you start washing the cloth, automatically it ends up into the sewer system. So you collect the wastewater, or otherwise if the condition will be really bad when there is no proper sewage system, or otherwise to collect it. If there is a non-point source solution or non-point of pollution, then it is still the matter is being exaggerated, or otherwise it is more matter of concern. But let us assume that it has been collected and then it is being treated in a wastewater treatment plant. Once these nanoparticle containing wastewater is being collected from a household, what happens for those treatment units which are there in place? Are they really efficient? Because those treatment processes or unit operations are based or defined to treat the organic load and then to reduce them once the wastewater leaves out of the treatment plant. So are they really efficient to capture these nanoparticles once they come in? And then are these nanoparticles really stay back as a nanoparticle once they get into the wastewater as a steam? Because wastewater is a heterogeneous mixture where you have the water quality parameters, the waste quality of the waste that gets carried out, the oil and grease, all plays a vital role, and then the material that floats onto the wastewater. So you have suspended, dissolved, colloidal system in place, and then all these influences the nanoparticles. That is nothing but the new entry into the wastewater, and then how they are there. So either it can form complex and then get associated with the wastewater or get settled, or otherwise it can stay back as such. So the $1,000,000 question is that whether it is there in the wastewater treatment plant or in the treated wastewater. So both are of matter of concern. Why? Because this treated wastewater is being applied onto the fields of agriculture. So that is one such major question. Followed by wastewater treatment plant. Again, if the processes are really capable enough, what is the impact? Or otherwise, if the processes is not in a position to remove those particles from the steam, what are they really capable of? So that is again one such question that pops up into the mind. So again, a different picture, which again says in an elaborate manner. So these nanoparticles which are being used, washed, and then at last it reaches the wastewater treatment plant. This was the thing that we are talking in detail, be it the grid chamber or otherwise a primary settling chamber or the secondary settling chamber. Where does this nanoparticle go? So whether the nanoparticles ends up as a waste or otherwise taken out, or does it get settled onto the activated sludge process along with the microbes, or does it get escaped from the uh, uh, in the form of effluent? So once it gets escaped, so the main problem is either it can lead into the pollution of the natural water bodies, because as per the law, once after treating the wastewater, you are entitled, or the municipal authorities are entitled to leave the water into a inland surface water body. So that means that how this, if particles which are there in the water can harm the organisms which are there in the river. So what is the happening? How does the nanoparticle behave in wastewater and water? So those are two different things. So they don't behave the same way. And then once in the sludge, which is when the nanoparticles are being there in the sludge, how do they get into the land, or otherwise what happens when they are applied onto the land is the $1,000,000 question. So other with respect to once you apply onto the agricultural field, again they with respect to rain, they again taken back into the river stream. So in soil there are different microorganisms. Either the nanoparticles can get onto the soil and then get within the soil itself, or otherwise they can be there transported to the nearby water stream. So again, this is one such big thing that needs to be looked into. So with respect to soil and aquatic environment, so the number of researchers who have looked into as a problem the fate of nanoparticles as a problem is one such thing is that transport mechanism in soil. How do these nanoparticles get transported within the soil, and then dissolution of these nanoparticles? How does these nanoparticle release ions, and then how they dissolute into the soil, and then uptake of these metal ions onto the roots or plants is $1 6 million question. And redox and reactivity potential are these nanoparticle. Most of the nanoparticle with respect to light, they can behave, or otherwise the UV range, they can behave in a different manner. How on what basis, or what is their reaction? What is their reactivity, and then how do they react with respect to the environment? And then deposition, whether they get deposited onto the any of the materials which is available on the soil is one such thing. And surface transformation, so based upon the natural organic matter or humic substances which are present in the environment, do they get really transformed? So that is one such thing that needs to be noted. With respect to aquatic environment, the transport is also getting more significance with respect to the number of publications. But again, as water is a medium, so when it comes to air, it can keep traveling over the geographic boundaries. But with respect to water, how does it behave? So whether it gets aggregated or it remains stable. So one such question is again in aggregation, whether it is homoaggregation or heteroaggregation. Homo is nothing but the particles of same nature get mixed and then they get aggregated. Hetero is nothing, as the name itself suggests, that organic matter or otherwise unique substances which are there, otherwise extracellular polymeric substances which get onto the nanoparticle, they get bigger in size and then get settled down. Dissolution, again followed by redox reactivity, is again one such major thing that also being looked into for reducing the pollutant concentration in the water. So normally these nanoparticles are applied with a combination of advanced oxidation process, whether they can be in a reactive mode to reduce the pollutant. So otherwise, if any recalcitrant waste or otherwise a pollutant is there in the wastewater, with the presence of these nanoparticles in wastewater, or otherwise which are there accidentally into the wastewater, are they really capable enough to counter attack these recalcitrant waste in the environment? So that is also one such domain in which the researchers are working. So with respect to the pathways in environment, so the major pathways, you can say that the diffusion, so from one concentration to other, and then hetero as well as homo aggregation part. With respect to the wastewater, again the dissolution of these nanoparticle into metal ions, or otherwise whether they get adsorbed or absorbed. So these are two things, whether they get adsorbed onto a media or absorbed onto the plants. So that is one such thing. And then with respect to as these are engineered nanomaterials, these nanomaterials have not only the core but also coating on towards the nanoparticle. As I have already mentioned that these nanomaterials have been used as for in the field of biotechnology for treating cancer cells. So in that sense, they target the specific cells. So in order to not to get reacted with any other particles in the surrounding or otherwise a matter in the surrounding, so they get coated. So what happens with respect to these coatings when they come back into the environment? So the role of surface coating, the role of size, the shape, as well as the surface charge plays a vital role in their pathways in the environment as well as fate in the environment. Apart from these, whether they get absorbed onto the living creatures such as aquatic organisms, or otherwise they get absorbed onto the microbes which are present in the wastewater. Apart from these, oxidation reduction process also happens or otherwise take place in the environment so that they can be helpful, or otherwise they reduce into one or the other form. So when it comes to transformation in the environment, mostly there are three different types of transformation that happens. One is physical transformation. So Normally, physically, how does these nanoparticles transform? So with respect to a stable particle, they become unstable and then they get transformed in one or the other way, or else the biological transformation, biodegradation or biomodification. What happens when these nanoparticle encounters a biofilm, whether they get onto the biofilm or otherwise they keep accumulating over the surface of the biofilm and then they kill the biofilm. And then chemical transformation, redox reactions. So, or otherwise the dissolution of metal ions, metal nanoparticle to metal ions, interaction with other contaminants. That is what I was mentioning earlier. So, with respect to any of the other metals or recalcitrant waste that is being there in the wastewater, what happens to them? So, whether are they really counter enough to target those materials in wastewater, and photochemical reactions. So with the help of sunlight, how do they behave? So that is one such thing. When it comes to all these things, one more important parameter will also be looked into, that is nothing but the environmental condition, whether what is the environment in which they work on. So whether air is a environment or water is an environment. When it comes to water, again, wastewater, all these things. So with respect to, let us look into the water or wastewater. So one such thing is the ionic strength concentration. So what is the concentration or the strength of ions which is there present? So because as the nanoparticles has surface charge, and then these ionic strength also plays a vital role in aggregation, or be it the homo or heteroaggregation. pH of the solution, what is the pH of the solution? That also plays a major role. Naturally available organic matter, be it from the decay of any of the organic material, light, that is nothing but from the sunlight, the temperature or otherwise the viscosity in which the material is being rooted to, and the properties of the nanomaterials, be it the surface or otherwise the optical or otherwise the physical properties of the materials or particles also plays a vital role in transforming in the atmosphere. So moving on, these nanoparticles transformation, as I mentioned earlier, so it can be in the physical form, either in the whether it get aggregated over the period of time. Aggregation is nothing but the size of the particle increases with respect to time. So once their mass of the particle increases, as we already know that they have a very high surface area, and then but at the other extent they are very small in nature. Once they are stuck in a specific place, or otherwise once they are stable in a place, and then we also know how these stable particles needs to be removed from the water system, be it the colloidal nature. So once this mass of the particle increases, automatically they get settled down. So one such main thing or main mechanism of removal of these nanoparticles is nothing but agglomeration. So how does this agglomeration happens? So as I have already mentioned that it is mainly with respect to the properties in which the nanoparticles are suspended, be it the water or wastewater. Or when it comes to water, again, the ionic strength, pH, naturally occurring organic matter, humic substances plays a vital role in getting the particles agglomerated. So again, homo and heteroaggregation. So again, with particles of same nature as well as particles of different natures. So heteroagglomeration with natural colloids is dominated when it is in water. It is mainly dominated over the homoagglomeration due to the realistic concentration, otherwise the trace concentration of these nanoparticles in the environment. So in water systems, heteroaggregation is dominated over the homoaggregations. With respect to the natural colloids being present in the water, and so the naturally available colloids which are being present is nothing but clay minerals. So again, clay has a specific surface charge attached to it, iron and manganese hydroxide, oxides, organic matter, and extracellular polymeric substances which are present both in aquatic as well as terrestrial environment. So as these all are present, so these can influence these nanoparticle to get aggregated, and then this falls under heteroaggregation. With respect to the natural system, the phenomenon in which these particles get aggregated is mainly through the Brownian moment. One such thing is Brownian, followed by differential settling, and then as well as fluid motion. So what is the fluid motion? But mostly it is dominated by the Brownian motion. So in Brownian motion, so again, with respect to the particle keeps, the particles are in a state of motion or always a constant motion and collide with each other. Mainly due to this, we call it as Brownian motion. And then because of this activity, they start acceleromaking. And then when it comes to surface charge, again, two different things needs to be looked into. One is van der Waals force, and then other one is the repulsive force, repulsive electrostatic force. So in order to make the particle come near, so you need to suppress the repulsive force and then make sure that the attractive forces dominate. Then only the particle acceleromations of is truly valid. Among the Brownian motion that happens, again, there are two different types of acceleration: perikinetic and micro and macro kinetic acceleration happens. And then for the particles of very small in size range, mostly the perikinetic dominates over the other. Apart, when it comes to acceleration, the other factors that plays a vital role is nothing but the particle size. That's, apart from the characteristics, what I mentioned is that the main characteristics of these nanoparticles, again, the size of the particle, whether they are how big are they or how small are they, and the surface charge. What is their surface charge? Every nanoparticle, as I have mentioned, they have the surface charge. In order to know this, we will be having separate set of experiments to know what is the surface charge of these nanoparticles in the media. The ionic strength, all these three things plays a vital role in the aggregation of these particles. When it comes to the agglomerated particles, this is the stable particles. These agglomerated particles have less surface area to volume ratio, whereas for the stable particle, they have more and accessible active sites in comparison to the primary particles. So that is nothing but the stable particles are relatively less, so that with the smaller the size of particle, they have very high active size, high surface area, but not with respect to the agglomerated site. Thus, the reactivity as well as the bioavailability and of these nanoparticles, of the agglomerated nanoparticles, decreases when compared with respect to the single nanoparticle or with the stable nanoparticle. So when it comes to the surface charge, I think as I mentioned, that the electrical double layer comes into picture. You need to suppress this repulsive as well as repulsive force. Again, we all also know that for a quick overview for the audience, once you have a particle, if it is again a negatively charged particle, automatically the charge of opposite charge will be dominating near the surface, where you will be having a very tightly packed charge of opposite charge. And then over the distance from the solid surface, or otherwise from the surface of any material, over the distance, you will be having a diffusive layer, or otherwise a layer in which you will be having both the ions in the solution. So that we call it as the first layer, is which is tightly packed, followed by the loose layer, that is which has both the ions. So here we call it as electrical double layer. In order to make the particle come near, so you need to compress, then only the aggregation will start. So I will just move on. So again, zeta potential is nothing but you measure the electrical potential of the particle in the solution, that we call it as zeta potential, or in some of the journals they would mention as point of zero charge, where you don't have any charge at that specific pH. So pH of point of zero charge is, if they mention it as 6.7. So at 6.7, the particle doesn't have any charge, or with the pH at 6.7, the particle doesn't have any charge. So moving on, with respect to the transformation in environment, as mentioned, the ionic strength plays a vital role. So again, we have seen the sand dunes. Let us not explain with respect to the nanoparticles. With respect to the sand dunes, or otherwise the delta formation. So again, that is one such classic example where we can able to give that. So because the surface water will have these very tiny particles, and then will have very low ionic strength, and then the sea will have a very high ionic strength, and then because these two meet at one specific place, all the particles, because of the high ionic strength and then the coagulants, and then the particles react and then they settle down at that place. So this is how these deltas are being formed. So in the similar fashion, this ionic strength plays a vital role. So assume, let us take the example of silver nanoparticle, which is being suspended in the ultra pure water. So these dots are nothing but the silver nanoparticle, plus is nothing but the dissolved silver ion concentration, followed by the suspended sediment. If you have any of the suspended solids as well as sediment associated with the DOM, is nothing but dissolved organic matter. So with respect to the ultra pure water, you will be having very less chances of getting aggregated. But at the high saline water, so these nanoparticles as well as the dissolved organic matter, the dissolved ion gets onto one on one, and then their mass keeps increasing. So with respect to aggregation, the ionic strength is another key parameter which regulates the degree of agglomeration, we can say. It depends upon what is the percentage of agglomeration that has happened, is directly related to the just a minute, the concentration of the ionic strength that is available in the. Not only the ionic strength, which is there present in the water, but also depends upon the pH of the solution, the charge, the specific charge, as well as the electrolyte type, as well as the concentration. What is the concentration of the electrolyte that is being present, or otherwise like divalent cations, monovalent cations, or what is their concentration that is available there, also plays a vital role. As the ionic strength increases, as we have mentioned here, as the ionic strength increases, the medium, or otherwise the medium of ions which is present in the solution, or otherwise the electrical double layer gets compressed. So the distance between the two particles will reduce, thus resulting in a less zeta potential. Otherwise, the zeta potential value also reduces, and then the nanoparticle charge modified due to the counter ion absorption. So again, because of the gap gets reduced, so they have a chance of getting absorbed onto the other material, and then because of that, the size gets increasing. This process facilitates the fast agglomeration rate. So again, the agglomeration which happens in the water of these nanoparticles in any of the water stream, or otherwise in the aquatic stream, which this ionic strength, pH, as well as the electrolyte concentration promotes more aggregation in the environment, since the steric repulsion, otherwise the repulsive force between the particle, is overcome by the attractive force. So once the repulsive force has been overcome, then there is no hesitancy for the particle to interact or to get agglomerated. So to agglomerate the engineered nanoparticles in suspension by surpassing the particles' repulsive force or electrostatic energy barriers, at least a minimum ionic strength concentration is required in order to compress, and then that we call it as CCC, critical coagulation concentration. So we say that it is CCC, that is the most critical concentration of the coagulant that is needed to reduce the electrical double layer. In the natural environment, obviously a colloidal suspension with high values of critical coagulation concentration will be stable enough, whereas stability reduces and the engineered nanoparticle agglomeration rate increases with lower coagulation concentration, critical coagulation concentration values. So natural organic matter, which is again present in the natural streams of water, be it the surface water, mainly refers to the heterogeneous pool of organic compounds ranging from macromolecules, be it the humic acid or fulvic acid, or otherwise extracellular polymeric substances, to low molecular weight substances such as carbon-based compounds and ligands, mainly the chlorides or sulfates based amines, carboxylic compounds, UOH compounds, and thiols, that is nothing but SH compounds, found in the natural aquatic environment. So again, these two also plays a vital role. So mainly the humic substances, fulvic substances, or otherwise the organic matter which is being present in the water, or otherwise the ligands which is also being present. So in the previous picture, if you could able to correlate silver getting converted as silver chloride or silver sulfate. So again, that is also one such a reaction that happens with the presence of ligands in the liquid media. These organic compounds are derived from decay of plants, so mainly from the decomposition of plants or the microbes, and animal residue which is there in the natural ecosystem. So this also helps them in the aggregation or otherwise suppressing the AA. So the inherent physiochemical characteristics of naturally occurring organic matter, such as humic substances, cause their absorption on a large number of natural surface and ENPs. These nanoparticles gets on or otherwise adsorbed onto the other substances which are present in the natural aquatic system because of the presence of this natural organic matter. So this natural organic matter, apart from ionic strength or pH, plays a vital role when it comes to the stability as well as agglomeration. Stability is nothing but the particle is there in the stable position in the water media. When it comes to agglomerator, the particle gets, the size gets bigger over the period of time, or the particle gets disagglomeration of already agglomerated nanoparticles, which depends solely on the environment in which it is being suspended. So the natural organic matter, which is being derived from the decomposition of plants, animals, or the animal residue, plays a vital role in stability as well as agglomeration of these nanoparticles. So when it comes to the transformation of these nanoparticles, so already we have looked into the chemical aspect. With respect to the chemical transformation, so chemical transformation such as it can happen such as oxidation reduction reactions in the environment. We call it as redox reactions. Dissolution, so again the particles discharging ions. Adsorption, so again the particle getting onto any of the surface. Complexation, so again it forms a complex because of the reaction it happens in the media. Degradation and photochemically induced reaction upon interaction with organic as well as inorganic ligands and other constituents in soil and water. So this soil and water, not only apart from the water quality characteristics, it has the other elements. So when these nanoparticles react with that, either it can have the redox reactions or dissolution can happen so that they can release the metal ions. Otherwise, again, these nanoparticles can get absorbed onto any media. So that can also be there, a viable option. So when it comes to surface as well as subsurface water, in natural waters and well aerated waters, normally when it is being exposed onto the atmosphere, so this oxidation process is very dominant when compared to the others. When in compared to oxygen depleted environment, mostly inside the sewer systems where you don't have much of oxygen, such as carbon rich sediments and groundwater, they normally the reaction would be in the reducing reactions will be there. So with respect to the naturally abundant of oxygen is there, oxidation reaction, and then when there is no much of oxygen, then reduction reaction will be there. So transformation in environment. So as I have already said that, so the nanoparticles, one such thing is that dissolution with respect to the chemical thing, the dissolution can happen from these nanoparticles. The nanoparticles, as we have already said that when the active sites will not be there huge for agglomerated particle, but for us the stable particle, the active sites will be more. They will be discharging more and more amount of ions into the solution. So one such thing is that the nanoparticle can release the ions onto the solution, or it can get agglomerated, or it can again react with any of the ligands which is being present in the water. So again, that is also one such thing. Or that can also, once this agglomerated gets onto the soil or water, it can get react with the groundwater that is being present. So dissolution is the key chemical transformation process. That is the release of water soluble ions and molecules from engineered nanoparticles. So with respect to these process in chemical, dissolution is one such key process where these metal based or otherwise the engineered nanoparticles start releasing metal ions into the water. So engineered nanomaterials can be classified as these nanoparticles are differently used in different applications. So as I mentioned that it can be silver, it can be copper, it can be iron, it can be titanium, it can be gold nanoparticles or carbon nanotubes, graphene oxide nanomaterials. Engineered nanoparticles can be classified highly as soluble and poorly soluble and insoluble. Where when it comes to soluble, the examples are silver, copper, copper oxide or iron oxide, quantum dots, and zinc oxide. With respect to poorly soluble cerium oxide, titanium dioxide are not soluble in nature, and insoluble are nothing but the carbon nanotubes, graphene, fullerenes are some of the examples which can be given for the poorly soluble substances. So engineered nanoparticle dissolution rate. So at what rate that the particle releases the metal ions is one such thing. It depends upon the properties, especially the chemical composition of the nanomaterials, the coating agent, whether the nanoparticle is being capped or uncapped, the surface chemistry, what is the surface charge as well as the surface property of these nanoparticles, the crystalline nature, the morphology of these nanoparticles, whether it is amorphous or crystalline, the size and the shape as well as the surface area plays a major role when it comes to the dissolution rate of these nanoparticles into the environment. Apart from these things, the media constituents such as pH, followed by ionic strength, the redox reaction, whether it is oxidation or reduction reaction, the temperature of, again, viscosity of the medium, the inorganic ligands and naturally occurring matter plays a vital role in the dissipation or dissolution of these metals into the water stream. Mainly when the particles are smaller in nature, they have more surface area and atoms per unit volume for reactivity, which substantially enhances the dissolution process. So when they are small, they release more concentration of metal ions into the solution. When they get bigger and bigger in size, so because of agglomeration, and then the surface area gets reduced, and then the reactivity also reduces, they substantially have less release when compared to the stable, otherwise a small nanoparticles. So the dissolution of, say, silver nanoparticles occurs in a well aerated soil and surface water. So that is nothing but the oxidative dissolution. As a result of atoms chemical oxidation, silver converts itself into silver ions. So once these silver ions are there in water, so assume that it is in surface water, so it can react with chloride and then form silver chloride as a precipitate. But at the same case, when this silver again reacts with in a not a well aerated system such as sewer, where sulfide is present, silver again forms silver sulfide in the wastewater. So this also plays a vital role with respect to the surface chemistry, the chemical composition, the morphology, the naturally occurring organic matter, the surface composition, the reactivity also plays a major role in dissipation of these into the environment. Moving on, how do they react? How do they meet each other? Whether they mingle each other is $1 million question. So because of these chemical or otherwise the metal components which are being leaked into the environment, how do these microbes takes them? Whether they welcome them or the microbes are sufficient, or otherwise the concentration in which the dissolution of these metal nanoparticle happens, is it permissible for the microbes to tackle them? Is a one such area where researchers are working. And then this also paves the way in assessing the risk of these nanoparticles in water as well as wastewater. So this will be the topic of concern for the forthcoming lectures. What will be the risk? Assume that these nanoparticles are there and then they start dissolution into the water. And then what is the risk towards the microbes or otherwise the humans who are present, or otherwise who consume these materials in one or the other form, be it in the form of food or in the form of water. So with this, we stop the lecture. If you have any queries, you can feel free to let us start discussing the queries, or else we can wind up the session. So if you have any queries, you can drop out in the chat box so that I can keep answering those. Okay, if there are no queries, then we will stop here, and then we will again meet at 2 o'clock for the forthcoming session. That is nothing but where Professor Dubey will be taking us towards the risk assessment, and there will be a tutorial for us. so that we will be all introduced to the aspects of risk analysis as well as the assessment. Thank you all for joining. So let's meet at 2 o'clock Indian Standard Time. Thank you.